The stars looked different today, Captain Dayhine thought, as he stood on the bridge of the human research vessel. New dawn, his coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he did not notice. The massive alien fleet approaching Earth made everything else seem small and unimportant. 1,000 ships filled the darkness of space. Each one was bigger than anything humanity had ever built. The Vorthon Empire had come to end the human problem once and for all. Their ships gleamed with deadly energy weapons that could crack planets like Extahain. Watched the enemy fleet move closer to Earth. His hands shook as he gripped the metal rail. The communication officer turned to him with fear in her eyes. The Vorthons had sent their final message: surrender. Now, or watch your world burn. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 50 years ago. They were the newest members, and everyone treated them like children. The other alien races had ships that could cross the galaxy in days. Humans needed weeks to make the same journey. Their weapons were weak. Their shields were paper thin. Vorthon Commander General Cathara sat in his massive flagship. He had destroyed 17 different species in his long career. Humans would be number 18. He looked at the small human fleet with amusement. These young races always thought courage could beat superior firepower. Admiral Sujin received the final transmission from the Galactic Council headquarters. The message was short and brutal. No one would help Earth. The Altarians claimed they were neutral in this conflict. The Kishari said they were too far away to send help. Zentari simply did not care if humanity lived or died. Earth was alone, facing extinction with nothing but old cruisers. In desperate courage, the human fleet had 60 ships. The Vorthons had 1,000. Every calculation showed the same result: total human defeat within hours. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, something ancient stirred. Sensors that had slept for millions of years suddenly came alive. Power flowed through systems that had been dormant since before humans learned to make fire. The water above began to glow with strange light, and the moon-buried installations started to hum with energy. Workers at Luna Base felt the ground shake beneath their feet. Ancient hangar doors that looked like natural rock began to split open, revealing spaces that should not exist in. The asteroid belt, what appeared to be ordinary rocks, started to change. They unfolded like metal flowers, revealing shapes that hurt the eyes to look at directly. The forgotten guardians of humanity were finally awakening from their long sleep. Dear Minho had spent his entire life searching for proof of the ancestors. The stories spoke of humans who had walked among the stars long before recorded history. His colleagues called him a dreamer, chasing fairy tales. They said the myths were just stories told to make humans feel important. Now his instruments detected massive energy signatures from locations that should have been empty space. The readings were impossible, but they were real. Ancient technology was activating all across the solar system. Vorthon's science officer stared at his readings in confusion. New contacts were appearing on his screens. Ships were rising from the depths of Earth oceans. More were emerging from hidden locations on the Moon and Mars. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their database. His General Cathara laughed when he saw the first reports. These humans were desperate now. They were probably launching everything they had, including cargo ships. Maybe they thought numbers would make up for their weak technology, but as more ships appeared, his laughter died. The vessels rising from Earth's oceans were massive beyond belief. One ship was over 10 kilometers long. Its hull was covered in strange markings that seemed to move and shift like living things. The human fleet suddenly looked different. Captain Dayhan watched in amazement as ancient warships took positions around his small vessel. The new dawn was tiny compared to these giants. The ships looked like they had been carved from liquid starlight. Lieutenant Borum could not believe what her scanner was showing. The ship that had just surfaced from the Mariana Trench was reading a solid matter, but her instruments could not identify what it was made of. The whole composition was unlike anything in known science. Commander Jamin was stationed at Luna Base. When the ground beneath him split open, ancient hangar bays revealed themselves containing fighters that looked like they had been waiting forever. The technology was impossibly advanced, yet somehow familiar. DNA locks engaged, recognizing him as human, granting him access to machines that had waited centuries for their creator's return. The fighter cockpit molded itself to fit his body perfectly. Systems came online, responding to his thoughts before he even knew what he was thinking. The Vorthon Fleet hesitated as more and more ancient vessels appeared. These were not the crude ships they had expected to face. The energy readings were breaking their instruments. The hull compositions were materials that did not exist in any known periodic. Tabledar Unicio worked frantically in a research lab trying to understand what was happening. The markings on the ancient ships were not just decorative, they were some kind of quantum writing that interacted with human consciousness. As she decoded the symbols, she realized they were instructions manuals for weapons and defenses that made current galactic technology look like stone tools. The ancient humans had not just been advanced, they had been operating on principles that the current galaxy did not understand. The first ancient battleship to fully activate was the Eternal Sentinel. Captain Hay-1 found herself somehow connected to the ship's systems. Her mind interfaced with artificial intelligence that had been dreaming for millennia. The ship memories flooded through her consciousness. She saw glimpses of an ancient human civilization that had once ruled the stars. They had been masters of space when the current galactic powers were still crawling in oceans the ancestors had voluntarily gone into hiding, leaving behind guardians to watch over their descendants. Siang pilot Taejon climbed into one of the discovered fighters. His hands trembled as the neural interface activated. Suddenly, he was not just flying a ship, he was part of it. The fighter responded to his thoughts, its weapon systems more precise than anything he had ever imagined. He could feel the ship's eagerness for battle, its joy at finally having a pilot again after centuries of waiting. The fighter was alive in ways that normal ships could never be. It wanted to protect humanity as much as he did the Vorthon. Advanced scouts sent to investigate the new ships never returned. The few garbled transmissions spoke of weapons that bent space itself, of shields that turned energy attacks into harmless light shows. The ancient human fleet was not just technologically superior, it was operating on principles that defied understanding. Kithara stared at his tactical display in growing alarm. Half his scout ships had simply vanished. The others were reporting impossible readings, ships that could appear and disappear at will. Weapons that ignored shields entirely, energy sources that seemed to draw power from empty space itself. The galaxy had always assumed that humanity was weak because they were young. The truth was far more terrifying. Humanity had never been weak. They had been sleeping. The ancient fleet was proof that humans had once been the masters of the stars. Admiral Sujin felt the weight of history on her shoulders. The ships around her were not just weapons, they were a legacy. The ancestors had prepared for this day when their descendants would need protection. The ancient fleet had waited patiently for the moment. When humanity would face extinction, the moment had come, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Vorthons had come to destroy what they thought was a weak young species instead. It awakened guardians that remembered when the stars were young. The real human fleet was emerging from hiding, and it was magnificent. The battle was about to begin, but the outcome was no longer certain. The ancient warships hung in space like sleeping giants awakening from a dream that had lasted millions of years. Humanity was no longer alone, and their enemies were about to learn what that meant. Lieutenant Borum stared at her scanner display in complete disbelief. The ship that had just surfaced from the Mariana Trench was over 10 kilometers long and made of materials that should not exist. Her instruments kept giving error messages. When they tried to analyze the whole composition, the ancient vessel looked like it had been grown rather than built. Its surface was smooth as glass, but covered in patterns that seemed to shift and move when she was not looking directly at them. The energy readings were so high, they broke her equipment. Commander Jamin felt the Luna base ground shake beneath his feet as ancient hangar bays opened around him. Fighters that looked like they had been carved from liquid starlight sat waiting. In perfect rows, each one was different, yet somehow the same, as if they had been made by artists instead of engineers. Climbed into the nearest fighter and gasped as the cockpit molded itself to fit his body perfectly. The neural interface activated. Before he could even touch it, his mind suddenly filled with knowledge he had never learned. How to fly this ship, how to use its weapons, how to become one with the machine. The fighter was not just a vehicle, it was a partner it had been waiting for. Him specifically, the DNA locks recognized him as human and granted him access to systems that had been dormant for countless centuries. The ship was happy to have a pilot again after so long alone. The Vorthon Fleet Commander General Kithara watched His tactical display with growing confusion, new contacts were appearing everywhere, ships were rising from Earth, oceans emerging from hidden bases on Mars and the outer moons. Each one was larger and more powerful than anything his scouts had reported. His science officer was practically screaming about impossible energy readings, hull compositions that did not match any known materials, weapon signatures that defied the laws of physics. The young human species was revealing technology that made his mighty fleet look like toys. Unesio worked frantically in her underground research facility, trying to decode the markings on the ancient ships. The symbols were not just decorative, they were a form of quantum writing that interacted directly with human consciousness. Each marking contained layers of meaning that unfolded as she studied them. Markings were instructions, manuals for weapons and defenses that made current galactic technology look primitive. The ancient humans had not just been advanced, they had been operating on principles that the current galaxy did not understand. Space and time were tools to be manipulated rather than barriers to overcome. The first ancient battleship to fully activate was the Eternal Sentinel. Captain Hay-1 found herself connected to the ship's systems in ways that should have been impossible. Her thoughts merged with an artificial intelligence that had been dreaming for millions of years. Through the ship memories, she saw glimpses of the ancient human civilization. They had been masters of the galaxy when the current powers were still primitive creatures crawling in swamps. The ancestors had possessed technology that could reshape reality itself. The ancient humans had not been destroyed or conquered. They had chosen to withdraw from galactic affairs voluntarily, going into deep sleep and leaving behind guardians to watch over their descendants. The awakening protocols had been set to trigger only when humanity faced extinction. Young pilot Taejun felt his consciousness expand as the fighter systems came online. He was not just controlling the ship, he was becoming part of it. The fighter responded to his thoughts faster than he could think them. Its weapon systems were more precise than anything he had ever imagined. The ship had personality and emotions. It was eager for battle, but also protective of its pilot. The fighter had been waiting centuries for this moment when it could finally fulfill its purpose to defend humanity against those who would destroy them. The Vorthan advanced scouts sent to investigate the new ships transmitted their final reports before disappearing forever. The ancient human vessels possessed weapons that bent space itself, shields that turned energy attacks into harmless light shows, propulsion systems that ignored the normal laws of physics. General Cathera received the scout reports with growing alarm. His most advanced ships were being destroyed without apparent effort. The ancient human weapons seemed to strike at the quantum level, unmaking matter itself, rather than simply destroying it. Dr. Yunji, studying the awakened ship systems, made a discovery that changed everything. The fleet that had emerged was only a tiny fraction of what lay hidden throughout human space. Automated systems were reporting thousands of dormant vessels waiting to be activated. Some were buried deep within planets, others were disguised as asteroids or space debris. The ancient humans had prepared for a war that might last forever. They had hidden weapons and defenses throughout the galaxy, waiting for the day when their descendants would need them. The Galactic Council emergency session was in chaos. Representatives from every major species were demanding answers about the human fleet. The Altarians, who prided themselves on advanced technology, were frantically trying to understand how human ships could operate on principles they had never imagined. The Kishari military command was analyzing battle recordings with growing fear. Their entire strategic doctrine was based on the assumption that they possessed the galaxy's most advanced weapons. The ancient human ships made their proud fleet look like children toys. Senator Wujin, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, found himself suddenly the most important person in the room. Species that had barely acknowledged his existence now sought urgent meetings. The same aliens who had refused to help Earth now begged for information about the ancient fleet capabilities. The Zentari, who had dismissed humanity as an insignificant species, were now calling emergency military conferences. The recordings from the battle showed human ships using technologies that made their weapons look primitive, energy sources that seemed to draw power from empty space itself. Captain Songho, commanding the ancient vessel Voidwalker, received priority transmissions from the Galactic Council. The messages were filled with legal threats and demands that humanity cease hostilities immediately. They claimed the ancient weapons violated galactic law. He deleted the transmissions without reading them fully. His attention was focused on the Vorthan fleet that still threatened. Earth, the ancient ship AI whispered tactical information directly into his mind, showing him enemy weaknesses that conventional sensors could never detect them. Vorthan General Cathara realized he was facing something beyond his understanding. The human ships moved through space like living things, appearing and disappearing at will. Their weapons ignored shields entirely, striking at some fundamental level that his science officers could not explain. His fleet had conquered 17 civilizations, but none had possessed technology like this. The ancient human vessels seemed to treat physics as suggestions rather than laws. They could bend space and time to their will in ways that should have been impossible. RM working with the awakened ship systems discovered the truth about humanity past the ancient civilization had not been destroyed. They had voluntarily entered stasis. The galaxy had been allowed to develop freely, but any serious threat to humanity would trigger the awakening. Protocols. The Vorthans had crossed a line that activated defenses millions of years old. The ancient fleet was not just protecting current humanity. It was fulfilling a promise made by the ancestors to always guard their descendants, no matter how long they had to wait. The awakening was spreading across human space as more and more ancient installations came online. Weapons that could move stars, shields that could protect entire solar systems, technologies that made the current galactic civilization look like primitive savages playing with fire. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had never been weak. They had been sleeping, and now they were awake. The battle began when General Cathara made his fatal decision. The Vorthan commander had come too far to retreat now. His empire reputation demanded that he crush these upstart humans, regardless of their mysterious new ships. He ordered his fastest vessels to test the ancient fleet defenses. Captain Dongwu stood on the bridge of the Starbreaker. Watching the enemy ships approach through the darkness of space, the ancient AI whispered tactical suggestions directly into his mind, showing him weaknesses in the Vorthon formation that he never would have noticed on his own. Enemy ships moved in perfect formation, their plasma cannons charging with deadly energy. General Cathara was confident that nothing could withstand the concentrated firepower of his battle group. These humans might have impressive ships, but they were still just primitives playing with weapons they did not understand. When Captain Dongwu gave the order to fire, the Starbreaker main cannon unleashed a beam of pure quantum energy that cut through space like a sword of light. The beam struck the lead Vorthan vessel and simply erased it from existence. The ship did not explode or burn, it just stopped being there. The Vorthan fleet recoiled in shock as their most powerful ships were destroyed without apparent effort. The ancient human weapons seemed to ignore shields, entirely striking at the quantum level to unmake matter itself. 3 more enemy vessels vanished in flashes of impossible light. Lieutenant Nyan piloted her ancient fighter through the enemy formation, moving like liquid lightning through space. The fighter systems automatically adjusted to avoid incoming fire, calculating trajectories faster than any computer she had ever seen. The ship was thinking for itself. Her weapons were precise beyond belief. Each shot was perfectly calculated to hit vital systems. Enemy ships exploded around her as she danced through their ranks. The Vorthon pilots could not target something that moved like it was alive there. Weapons fired at empty space. Dawn Crusher, commanded by Commander Kyunho, demonstrated another terrifying capability. Instead of firing conventional weapons, the ship generated a field that aged everything it touched. Vorthon vessels that entered the field suddenly found their hulls corroding as centuries of entropy struck them in. Seconds, metal turned to rust in moments, electronics failed as their components aged beyond function, entire ships crumbled to dust. As the field passed over them, the Vorthons had never seen anything like it. Their science officers screamed about impossible readings as their vessels aged to death. Admiral Sujin coordinated the human response from the command ship, Humanity Wrath. The ancient vessels were fighting with coordination that seemed supernatural. Their AI systems shared information at the speed of thought. Each ship knew exactly what the others were doing. The Vorthons, despite their superior numbers, were being systematically destroyed. The ancient human fleet moved like a single organism, each ship supporting the others in perfect harmony. It was not just advanced technology, It was a completely different way of fighting. General Cathara watched his tactical display with growing horror. His fleet was being dismantled by opponents who seemed to predict his every move. The humans were not just winning, they were making it look easy. 1,000 ships were being destroyed by a few dozen ancient vessels. The Vorthan Empire had conquered systems for a millennium. Their military was the most feared force in the galaxy, yet they were being beaten by a species they had dismissed as barely civilized. The ancient human ships fought with precision that defied belief, Captain. Haywan felt the Eternal Sentinel respond to her thoughts like a living thing. The ship AI showed her tactical information that revealed enemy weaknesses she could never have found alone. The ancient weapon systems were works of art as much as instruments of war. She targeted the Vorthan command ship with weapons that bent space itself. The enemy vessel tried to escape, but the Starbreaker weapons followed it through dimensions the Vorthons did not know existed. The command ship twisted and collapsed as reality itself rejected its presence. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the most powerful military force in known space was being dismantled. The Vorthan Empire, which had destroyed 17 civilizations, was meeting its match in the awakened Guardians of Humanity commander. Jehun aboard the Stormbringer detected something that made his blood run cold. General Cathara was charging a planet-killer weapon that had been banned by galactic law for centuries. The desperate Vorthan commander would rather destroy Earth than accept defeat. The planet killer was a weapon of mass destruction that could crack worlds in half. Its use violated every treaty in galactic law, but the Vorthans were beyond caring about law now. They faced complete annihilation and would take humanity with them, if possible, Captain. Jehun acted without hesitation as the planet killer reached full charge. His ship defensive systems activated something the AI called a reality anchor. The ancient technology created a bubble of space where the planet killer energy simply could not exist. The forbidden weapon fired with the power to destroy worlds, but its energy struck the reality anchor and simply vanished. The destructive force was absorbed by systems that treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions rather than absolute rules. The Vorthan fleet began to panic as their ultimate weapon failed completely. Their most powerful ships were being destroyed by enemies they could not understand. The ancient human vessels seemed to exist outside normal space and time. Young pilot Tajin felt his fighter AI guide him through the enemy formation. The ship was eager for battle. After centuries of waiting, it moved through space like a living thing, avoiding enemy fire and striking with perfect precision. His weapons did not just destroy enemy ships, they unmade them at the quantum level. The fighter systems were so advanced that they seemed like magic. Each shot was calculated to cause maximum damage while using minimum energy. The Vorthan science officers were screaming about impossible readings as their instruments failed to comprehend what they were seeing. The ancient human technology operated on principles that their best scientists could not explain. Dr. Unicio watched the battle from her research station and understood what was happening. The ancient humans had not just been advanced, they had been operating on a completely different level of reality. They had learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Markings on the ancient ships were not just instructions, they were keys to understanding reality itself. The ancestors had discovered secrets that the current galaxy had not even begun to imagine. Space and time were tools to be used rather than barriers to overcome. General Cathara realized that his fleet was doomed. The ancient human vessels were not just superior, they were operating on principles that made his weapons useless. He had brought 1,000 ships to fight gods and was learning the price of arrogance. The battle was turning into a massacre as more Vorthan ships fell to the ancient weapons. The human fleet moved with coordination that seemed impossible, each vessel supporting the others in perfect harmony. The Vorthans were being hunted by predators they could not even see clearly. Captain Songho watched the enemy fleet dissolve before his eyes. The Voidwalker weapon systems were works of art that destroyed with surgical precision. Each shot was calculated to cause maximum psychological impact on the surviving enemy ships. The Vorthon retreat began as their remaining ships tried to flee from the ancient human fleet, but there would be no escape from Guardians who had waited millions of years for this moment. The ancestors had prepared for every possibility. The galaxy was witnessing the end of Vorthan dominance and the beginning of something new. The ancient human fleet was showing the universe what happened when you threatened the children of the stars. The awakening had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. The quantum communication networks carried impossible reports of the Vorthan fleet being destroyed by ancient human ships. Every major civilization received the same unbelievable message. The weakest species in the galaxy had just defeated the strongest. The Galactic Council members, who had refused to help humanity now, watched in growing alarm as their assumptions about power crumbled. Altarians who prided themselves on their advanced technology realized that human ships were operating on principles they had never imagined. Senator Wujin Earth, representative to the Galactic Council, found himself suddenly the most important person in the chamber species that had barely acknowledged his existence now, sought urgent meetings. The same aliens who had called humans primitives now begged for information about the ancient fleet capabilities. The Kishari ambassador, who had once dismissed humanity as a minor irritant, now trembled as she requested an emergency audience. The recordings from the battle showed human ships using technologies that made her proud civilization look like children playing with toys. The Zentari military command was incomplete. Chaos. Their entire battle doctrine was based on the assumption that they possessed the galaxy's most advanced weapons. The ancient human fleet had shattered that assumption with casual ease. Their war planners stared at tactical displays that showed impossible readings. Captain Sung-ho, commanding the ancient vessel Voidwalker, received a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. The message was filled with legal threats and demands that humanity cease hostilities immediately. They claimed the ancient weapons violated galactic law and threatened sanctions. He deleted the transmission without reading it fully. The irony was not lost on him. The same council that had refused to help Earth now demanded that humanity follow their rules. The ancient ship AI whispered tactical information about remaining Vorthan forces that needed to be eliminated. The Altarian science Directorate called an emergency session as their best minds tried to understand what they had witnessed. The battle recordings showed human ships bending space and time using energy sources that seemed to draw power from empty space itself. Crevel, the most respected physicist in Altarian space, stared at the data with growing horror. The ancient human technology did not just break the known laws of physics, it seemed to rewrite them entirely. The implications were terrifying for every established civilization. The Kishari Empress, ruler of the second largest empire in the galaxy, convened an emergency session of her war council. The ancient human ships had capabilities that their best scientists could not explain. Energy weapons that ignored S.H.I.E.L.D.'s defensive systems that rewrote reality itself. Her military advisors were unanimous in their assessment. Humanity was no longer the weak species they had dismissed. The ancient fleet represented a level of technology that made every other civilization look primitive. The balance of galactic power had shifted overnight. Dar Yunji, studying the ancient ship systems in her Earth laboratory, made a discovery that would change everything. The awakened fleet was only a fraction of what lay hidden throughout human space. Automated systems were reporting thousands of dormant vessels waiting to be activated. Some were buried deep within planets, others were disguised as asteroids or space debris. The ancient humans had prepared for a war that might last forever. They had hidden weapons and defenses throughout the galaxy, waiting for the day when their descendants would need them. The Vorthan home system received garbled transmissions from the surviving ships of their grand fleet. The reports spoke of impossible weapons that unmade matter itself, of shields that turned energy attacks into harmless light. The once mighty Vorthan military was in full retreat. General Cathara broadcast his final message to the Vorthan High Command before his flagship was destroyed. The ancient human ships were not just technologically superior, they were operating on principles that made resistance impossible. He recommended immediate surrender. Defense Council met in emergency session as they watched their greatest rival being systematically destroyed. The Vorthans had been the most powerful military force in known space. If they could be defeated so easily, what hope did anyone else have, Captain? Heejin, commanding the reality render, was pursuing the last Vorthon survivors when her ship AI informed her of something interesting. The fleeing vessels were transmitting detailed scans of the human fleet to their home system. She smiled coldly and activated the ship information warfare systems. The ancient technology could turn the enemy-owned transmissions into weapons the data streams would carry. Hidden programs that would cripple the Vorthan networks when they tried to analyze the information. The Vorthan home system received the transmissions and immediately fell into chaos. The data streams carried viruses that infected their networks, causing their defense systems to identify their own ships as enemies. The proud Vorthan military found themselves fighting their own computers. Galactic stock markets crashed as traders realized the implications of what they had witnessed. The Vorthan Empire had been the guarantor of stability in their sector. Their sudden defeat by humanity meant that all existing power structures were now in question. Ambassador Chilsu received a flood of communications from species across the galaxy. Some offered alliance, others begged for mercy. A few threatened war if humanity did not disarm immediately. He responded to them all with the same message. Humanity had tried diplomacy and been ignored. They had sought peace and been threatened with extinction. Now they would speak in a language the galaxy understood. The ancient fleet would ensure that Earth was never threatened against them. Regulan Trade Federation, which had imposed harsh economic sanctions on humanity, suddenly reversed course. Their merchant princes, who had profited from human weakness, now offered favorable trade deals and technology. Exchanges. Captain Ino, aboard the Eternal Judgment, watched the political maneuvering with amusement. The same species that had dismissed humanity as inferior now competed to win human favor. The ancient fleet had not just won a battle, it had reshaped Galactic politics. DRRM, working with the awakened ship systems, discovered more about humanity forgotten past the ancient civilization. Had not been destroyed, they had voluntarily entered stasis, leaving behind guardians to watch over their descendants. Galaxy had been allowed to develop freely, but any serious threat to humanity would trigger the awakening protocols. The Vorthans had crossed a line that activated defenses millions of years old, the collective of synthetic minds which had refused to acknowledge human sentience. Now sent urgent diplomatic overtures. Their quantum intelligences had analyzed the battle data and reached a disturbing conclusion. The ancient human technology was not just advanced, it was fundamentally different. It operated on principles that suggested the ancestors had achieved something approaching godhood. The synthetic minds wanted to understand how this was possible. The Spiral Arm Council, which governed the Outer Rim territories, declared emergency neutrality. They had no desire to face the same fate as the Vorthans. The ancient human fleet represented a level of power that made resistance. Suicidal Captain Dongwu received reports from across human space as more ancient installations came online. Weapons platforms that had been hidden for millennia were revealing themselves. The ancestors had prepared for every contingency. The awakening was spreading as dormant systems recognized the threat to their creators' descendants. Ships that had waited in the void between stars were activating. Defense platforms hidden in asteroid fields were coming online. Commander Kung Ho realized that the battle with the Vorthans had been just the beginning. The ancient fleet was revealing itself to the galaxy, and the implications were staggering. Every major civilization would have to reconsider their relationship with humanity. The galaxy trembled. As the true scope of human preparation became clear, the ancestors had not just hidden a few ships. They had built a shadow empire that spanned the stars. The sleeping guardians were awakening everywhere. Age of treating humanity as a minor species was over. The ancient fleet had announced to the galaxy that Earth children were under the protection of powers that predated current civilization. The universe would never be the same. The last Vorthan ships were fleeing in panic through the outer system when the ancient human fleet demonstrated why they had once been the galaxy masters. The Eternal Judgment, commanded by Captain Inho, activated its quantum drive and appeared instantaneously in the path of the retreating vessels. There would be no escape from this battlefield. No survivors would return to spread fear throughout the Vorthan Empire. The ancient protocols were clear. Any species that threatened humanity with extinction would face complete annihilation and return the fleeing. Vorthan ships fired desperately at the massive human vessel, but their weapons passed through it like it was made of light. The Eternal Judgment existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making it impossible to target with conventional weapons. Captain Inho felt the ship AI merged with his consciousness, showing him the tactical situation with perfect clarity. The remaining Vorthan vessels were trapped like insects in amber there. Fate had been sealed the moment they chose to threaten Eartha. Galactic powers that had dismissed humanity as primitive savages now faced a terrible realization. The humans had not been weak. They had been sleeping. The ancient fleet technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to their observers. Ambassador Chalsu sat in the Galactic Council chambers watching the emergency session unfold. Representatives from every major species were demanding explanations about human capabilities. The same aliens who had refused to help Earth now begged for mercy. The Altarian delegate was practically weeping as he spoke of the impossible readings. Their sensors had detected the ancient human ships bent space and time with casual ease there. Weapons operating on principles that violated everything his people understood about physics. The Kashari representative spoke in hushed tones about the implications of what they had witnessed. If humanity possessed such technology, why had they hidden it for so long? What other secrets were they keeping from the galaxy? The truth was more terrifying than any of them could imagine. The ancient human civilization had withdrawn from galactic affairs, voluntarily choosing to watch from the shadows. As younger species developed, the sleeping guardians had awakened only when their descendants faced extinction. Dr. Unicio, working frantically in her laboratory, decoded more of the quantum writing on the ancient ships. The markings revealed the scope of the ancestors' preparations. They had not just hidden a few vessels. They had built a shadow empire that spanned the galaxy. Weapons platforms disguised as asteroids, defense systems buried in planetary cores, entire fleets hidden in pocket dimensions. The ancient humans had prepared for a war that might last forever. They had made humanity virtually indestructible. The Vorthon home system descended into chaos as the surviving ships transmitted their final reports. The ancient human fleet was not just superior, it was operating on a level of technology that made resistance meaningless. Their empire greatest military commanders were fleeing in terror. General Kithara broadcast his final message before the eternal judgment erased his flagship from existence. The ancient human ships were gods among mortals. Their weapons could unmake reality itself. No force in the galaxy could stand against them. The Zentari would threaten to destroy human colonies if they expanded too quickly. Now sent desperate diplomatic messages. They offered tribute technology exchanges, anything that might appease the awakened Guardian's captain. Hijin, commanding the reality render, watched the enemy information networks collapse as her ship. Digital warfare systems infected their communications. The ancient technology could turn data itself into a weapon, causing enemy computers to self-destruct. Vorthan military networks that had coordinated the invasion of Earth now turned against their own forces. The infected systems identified Vorthan ships as enemies, causing massive friendly fire incidents throughout their territory. The galactic economy was in freefall as traders realized that all existing power structures were now obsolete. The Vorthan Empire had been the dominant military force for centuries. Their sudden destruction by humanity meant that the entire balance of power had shifted. Species that had profited from human weakness now competed desperately to win favor with the awakened Guardians. The Rigelian Trade Federation offered massive economic concessions. The hegemony of worlds promised to lift all restrictions on human expansion. Yunji made another terrifying discovery as she studied the ancient ship systems. The awakened fleet was receiving reports from across the galaxy. Hidden installations were coming online in every sector. The ancestors had prepared for threats from any direction. Commander Kyung-ho realized that the battle with the Vorthans had been just a demonstration. The ancient fleet was revealing itself to the galaxy in measured doses. Each activation sent a clear message to potential enemies. Collective of synthetic minds which had questioned human consciousness now acknowledged their error there. Quantum intelligences had analyzed the ancient technology and reached a disturbing conclusion. Human ancestors had achieved something approaching technological godhoods. The Spiral Arm Council, governing the outer territories, declared complete neutrality in any conflict involving humanity. They had no desire to face the same fate as the Vorthans. The ancient fleet represented power beyond their comprehension. Captain Songho received updates from across human space as More dormant systems activated. Orbital weapons platforms that had been hidden for millennia were revealing themselves. The ancestors had turned the entire galaxy into a fortress protecting their descendants. The awakening was accelerating as ancient protocols recognized the scope of the threat. Ships that had waited in the void between stars were returning to active duty. Defense networks hidden in nebulae were coming online. Young pilot Tajan felt his fighter AI share memories of the ancient war that had driven humanity into hiding. The ancestors had faced enemies that sought to destroy all organic life. They had prepared for the possibility that such threats might return. The galaxy trembled as the true scope of human preparation became clear. Every major star system contained hidden guardians. Every trade route was monitored by ancient sensors. The sleeping empire was awakening everywhere. Their age of treating humanity as a minor species was ending, the ancient fleet had announced to the universe that Earth children were under the protection of powers that predated current civilization. The galaxy would have to learn new rules. Admiral Sujin stood on the bridge of humanity wrath, watching the last Vorthan ships die in the darkness. Her fleet had grown from dozens to hundreds. As more ancient vessels emerged from hiding, the ancestors had left nothing to chance. The Vorthan Empire, which had conquered 17 civilizations, was being systematically destroyed by the awakened guardians. Their 1,000-year reign of terror was ending at the hands of the species they had sought to exterminate. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible became reality. The weakest species had revealed themselves as the strongest. The primitives had shown themselves to be the inheritors of technology beyond imagination. The universe was learning that humanity had never been defenseless. They had been patient. The ancient fleet was proof that the ancestors had prepared for every possible threat. The sleeping guardians would never allow their descendants to face extinction again. The reckoning had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy trembled as humanity's true nature was finally revealed. The ancient fleet had been just the beginning. Across human space, hidden installations were activating, revealing the scope of their ancestors' preparations. Weapons that could move star shields that could protect entire systems. President Monkey addressed the Galactic Council from the bridge of the ancestors' pride, the largest ship in the ancient fleet. His message was broadcast to every civilized world in the galaxy. The time for treating humanity as children was over. His words were simple, but carried the weight of millions of years of preparation. Humanity had been patient for eons, allowing younger species to grow and develop. That patience had been mistaken for weakness, and the mistake had nearly cost them everything. The Vorthan Empire, faced with the complete destruction of their military, sued for peace. Their unconditional surrender was broadcast across the galaxy. A formerly proud civilization reduced to begging for mercy from the species they had sought to exterminate. The age of Vorthon dominance was over, ended by the awakening of Earth Guardians. The empire that had conquered 17 civilizations was now a broken remnant pleading for survival. The galaxy had learned what happened to those who threatened humanity. Admiral Sujin found herself commanding a fleet that rivaled the combined forces of the rest of the galaxy. The ancient ships were self-repairing, their AI systems capable of building new vessels from raw materials. Humanity would never again be vulnerable to the whims of older civilizations. Galactic Council met in emergency session, desperately trying to understand what humanity wanted. The answer came from Captain Sungmin, speaking for the ancient fleet. The humans wanted only what they had always sought respect for, too. Long humanity had been dismissed as inferior, treated as primitives, who should be grateful for any scraps thrown their way. That era was ending. The galaxy would learn to treat humanity as equals, or face the consequences, though. Altarian Science Directorate published their analysis of the battle recordings. The ancient human technology operated on principles that made their proudest achievements look like cave paintings. The implications were staggering for every established civilization. Dr. Crevel, the most respected physicist in Altarian space, publicly admitted that his entire understanding of physics had been wrong. The ancient human ships rewrote reality itself with casual ease. Their weapons existed in dimensions that his people had never imagined. The Kishari Empress, ruler of the second-largest empire in the galaxy, sent a formal apology to Earth for dismissing human concerns. Her military advisors were unanimous in their assessment. Resistance to humanity was now impossible. Commander the Jin, exploring the deepest vaults of the ancient ships. discovered records of other sleeping civilizations humanity ancestors had been part of a confederation of species that had withdrawn from galactic affairs eons ago. The attack on Earth might have awakened more than just human guardians. The ancient record spoke of allies who had agreed to watch over each other's descendants. If the awakening spread, the galaxy would face powers beyond imagination. The Zentari Defense Council, which had once threatened to destroy human colonies, now offered complete submission. Their military doctrine was based on the assumption that they possessed superior technology. The ancient human fleet had shattered that assumption. Captain Haywan received reports from across the galaxy as more ancient installations revealed themselves. The ancestors had not just prepared for war, they had prepared for the complete reshaping of galactic civilization. Hidden shipyards in the void between stars were beginning production of new vessels. Defense platforms buried in planetary cores were activating entire fleets that had waited in pocket. Dimensions were returning to normal space. The awakening was spreading beyond human territory as ancient sensors detected the activation of allied systems. The Confederation that had withdrawn from galactic affairs was stirring other sleeping guardians. We're beginning to wake. DRRAM, working with the awakened ship systems, discovered the full scope of the ancient preparations. The ancestors had not just hidden weapons, they had built a shadow civilization that spanned the galaxy. Every major star system contained hidden guardians. Every trade route was monitored by ancient sensors. The sleeping empire had been watching, waiting for the moment when their descendants would need protection. The galactic economy was restructuring itself around the new reality. Species that had profited from human weakness now competed desperately to win favor with the awakened guardians. Trade routes that had excluded humanity were suddenly opened. The Regalian Trade Federation, which had imposed harsh sanctions on human colonies, now offered exclusive partnerships. Their merchant princes, who had grown rich from human labor, now begged for the privilege of serving Earth. Ambassador Cholsu found himself the most powerful diplomat in the galaxy. Representatives from every major species sought meetings with him. The same aliens who had dismissed human concerns now hung on his every word. The new galactic order was being established, not through negotiation, but through the simple recognition of power. Humanity took its place among the great civilizations backed by technology that made their neighbors' achievements look primitive. Young pilot Taejun felt his fighter AI share visions of the future. The ancient ships were not just weapons. They were teachers. The sleeping guardians would help humanity reclaim their birthright as masters of the stars. The galaxy was learning that the age of treating Earth as a minor player was over. The ancient fleet patrolled human space, serving as silent reminders of what happened to those who threatened humanity. Children Captain Inho, commanding the Eternal Judgment, received updates from across the galaxy as more species pledged allegiance to the new order the universe was adapting to. The reality of human power, the collective of synthetic minds which had questioned human consciousness, now sought to understand how biological beings had achieved such technological mastery. Their quantum intelligences studied the ancient ships. With desperate fascination, the Spiral Arm Council, governing the outer territories, declared themselves protectorates of humanity. They had no desire to face the same fate as the Vorthans. The ancient fleet represented power beyond their comprehension. Dir. Unicio decoded the final layers of the quantum writing on the ancient ships. The markings revealed the true purpose of the Unicio. Withdrawal. The ancestors had not been defeated. They had been preparing for a greater threat. The galaxy itself was under observation by forces that viewed organic life as a disease to be eliminated. The ancient human confederation had withdrawn to prepare for the day when these enemies would return. The awakening of the Guardians was not just about protecting current humanity. It was about preparing for a war that would determine the fate of all organic life in the universe. The sleeping empire was rising to face an ancient enemy. The galaxy would never be the same. The young species that had been dismissed as weaklings had revealed themselves as the inheritors of the star's first masters. In the void between worlds, ancient ships continued their eternal vigil. The age of human weakness was over. The galaxy trembled at the sound of Earth awakening roar. The ancestors had kept their promise to always protect their descendants no matter how long they had to wait. Universe was learning new rules, and humanity would right them.